Hi, welcome to Resilience Brilliance. I'm Jena Taylor, resilience strategist and founder of Resilience Brilliance podcast and programs. My show was born out of my own story of survival. After a traumatic brain injury, I couldn't walk, talk, or even remember. I had to start from scratch. Within months, I fought my way back, first to independence and eventually to rebuilding a six-figure career. My mantra became reclaim my life, and it's the heartbeat of everything I do. Resilience Brilliance is for anyone struggling with adversity, burnout, or the weight of life's challenges, especially women and leaders experiencing life transitions. The show delivers inspiring stories, practical tools, and expert insights so you can overcome, rebuild, and reclaim your own life with heart, humility, and humor. My guest today is Helen Valentino, all the way from East Sussex, England. She is an ex-Army nurse, entrepreneur, and the second company she worked for, she took from 0 to 4 million pounds in 3 years. She currently works as the non-executive director, so she doesn't waste the skills and wisdom she gained. And since her 20s, Helen has been training and practicing in holistic therapies. Currently, Helen is a practicing shamanic healer, teacher, and works as a medicine woman working with the plant medicines cacao and mushrooms. She also works with forgiveness as medicine. Helen holds healing retreats in her woodland in East Sussex, where she lives off the grid alone. Welcome so much to the show, Helen. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me. And we have quite a lot in common. When we found out we were both podcasters, and then we had a similar theme. We both want to help people. Mine called Thriving, Not Surviving, but helping people to move from surviving to thriving. And you with your Resilience Brilliance, it's just wonderful. And I'm very honored to be on your podcast.
Thank you.
And so am I just going to kind of share my story?
Yes, please. We are doing a podcast swap. Yesterday, I was on her podcast, Thriving, Not Surviving.
Yeah, that's great.
And so here we are. Here we are gathered again, talking about resilience and sharing our stories. And so, yes, if you would please take the floor, go ahead and tell everyone how your resilience story started, and where you are today and what you've encountered and how you felt along the way.
Okay. Well, I think the overarching theme of my story is actually betrayal. And it's taken me a while to really notice that. And I think it'll become apparent as I share my story. But I guess the first trauma, well, there was many, the first major trauma in my life was that I was sexually abused by my father. And it went on since my grandma died when I was 8. She lived with us. It's very close to my grandma. It's quite traumatic when she died because I hadn't seen it for 2 weeks. And that's another story. And I'm not going to go into that there. But that was my first real massive trauma in my life, being not seeing my grandma just before she died, because she'd lived with us and she was like my mom, really. But then after she died, the sexual abuse started from my father. And it was a long time ago. I mean, I'm 56, so it wasn't really spoken about. In England now, we have a thing called Childline, and it's in the news all the time. But when I was a kid, it was just never talked about, and it was really kind of brushed under the carpet. I mean, it was going on, don't get me wrong, everywhere, but it just wasn't spoken about. And so I didn't even know it was a thing, And all I knew was that I was very uncomfortable around my father, and he would come into my room, and sometimes I'd go into my parents' room, my mum would leave. And I don't think she wasn't complicit in a sense, but I found out many years later she knew it was going on, but was probably too ashamed, too scared. So she kind of had to turn a blind eye. I mean, I think that was her survival strategy. But of course, that in itself, I think that was almost more painful when I found that out than the abuse, really. And I don't know why, but I think you just think that your mother's going to protect you. My father was not a well man, not just, obviously mentally, because he was abusing his daughter, but he had got mercury poisoning. He was a dentist and got mercury poisoning, and he ended up with heart problems. He had many heart attacks and bypasses, and he was a very angry man. And I remember I was terrified of him. And my mother, I think, was too. And so we kind of lived in fear of this sort of, and he was 6 foot something, 4, I think, probably. And he was a big man. I mean, he had a big belly on him, and he was quite, and he was fine. And I tried, in my little child ways to sort of tell my mum what was going on, but I didn't have the vocabulary really, and I didn't really know it was wrong. I just knew that I didn't like to be with my dad on my own, and I didn't like my father very much. And I would have nightmares and say, "Oh, Dad's coming to attack us," and make a big thing. And she'd be like, "Oh, you're just having a nightmare." And I tried all these little things. This poor little. I mean, I look back on this little girl who was fighting, to, keep her head above water. And I struggled at school at the same time because I was undiagnosed ADHD until 4 years ago. And so I had it was quite challenging. And yeah, it was painful really. And I was bullied at school as well. Yeah, I just at the age of sort of 16 or 15, just as I was about to go in to do my A levels, we do those 16 to 18, they're called A levels here. I remember just saying, I'm not going back to that school. You can't force me. And then being given the option to go to boarding school. And I could not wait to get away from the house, the family. The abuse had stopped when I was about 12 or 13. I don't remember. One of the problems I think my memory is, I even to this day, I can't work out years. I've got 2 years in my head, 88 and 89, that I have to try and work everything back or forwards from. I don't have a lot of childhood memories, but one very vivid memory that I've never been able to kind of lose was when, and I even remember the pajamas I was wearing. I was wearing these yellow pajamas with little flowers on them. And my dad had his hands down my pajamas and he heard my mum coming up the stairs. And I think it must have been unexpected. Maybe he thought she'd gone out or something. And I remember him literally ripping his hand out of my pajamas. And that was enough for me to know that all the feelings I'd had, all the ookiness and not wanting to be around him and feeling really weird. And, content warning here, people, but my father gave me my first orgasm and I didn't know what it was. I was really young, probably 9, 10. And I thought, it was, it was really uncomfortable. And because I didn't know what was going on, I had a young little body and, it was really, but I didn't know that, it was really wrong. Do you know what I mean? So I was doing everything to just sort of say, Daddy's not very nice. And I don't really like being with him. But anyway, this one act of his, it was like I'd been caught with my hand in the sweetie jar, and it was like a grown up version of that. And I was like, that's not, he's guilty. I could tell he was like, and I don't know really how to describe it, but I just knew that was it. Suddenly, and I guess this was my first time, and I thought, he knows that I know. Somehow it was just this really weird thing, but he knew because of his actions that I knew that it wasn't right because Mum was coming and he was like, doing something, that he shouldn't have been doing. And that was when I suddenly realized that I could have some sort of power. I think I was maybe 12, 11, 12 or 13. I'm not exactly sure. And I knew I could avoid him. And that's, and then so when I got the opportunity to go to boarding school, anything, I would never try and be in the house with him or anything. And luckily, in a way, he was so horrible that it was quite easy to avoid him because Mum used to say, well, don't go anywhere near your father because he's like in a foul mood today. So it was kind of in some ways, it was a blessing that he, but I went to boarding school and at 16 and it was the best 2 years of school. And in some ways, it was sort of the best 2 years of my life. But then someone reminded me the other day that I was cutting when I was at boarding school. And that then took me back to a memory when so I wasn't that happy, but that was all about boys. That wasn't to do with my father. But of course I was damaged at that point, And I remember one of my cries for help when I was about 8 or 9. Again, I'm not 100% sure of ages, but I just remember being in the bathroom. I remember those funny sort of bath mats, and it was one of those ones that sort of has little things going and they're sort of twirled around each other like little spirals of cotton or absorbent material. And I just remember going to the bathroom and I saw my dad's a razor blade for my dad's, they had those flat razors in those days that had like separate razor blades. And so I don't know what possessed me. I'd never heard of cutting. I didn't know anything about that, but I just remember looking at that razor blade and thinking, I have this need to create pain. And I think somehow subconsciously, I just thought if my leg, because I slashed my leg with this razor blade, I think I was just thinking the pain of that might take away all the pain that I'm feeling inside. So I slashed my leg and then thought afterwards, I was like, oh my God, now how am I going to explain this? Oh my God, what have I done? Panicking, little kid, oh God, it seemed like such a good idea at the time. And now I've got this blood pouring everywhere. I can't stop my leg bleeding. I had to go downstairs and say, oh, I've cut my leg accidentally with a razor blade. And I laugh now. I shouldn't laugh, but you've got to have a bit of humor sometimes. But like I came up, I couldn't even think of a story. So I just said, I tripped on the bathroom, the bath mat and the razor blade just went into my leg. It's absolutely implausible. It was probably a literally scientific impossibility, but everyone was just like, oh, and then I had to go to hospital because they couldn't stop the bleeding at home. I had to go and have they didn't stitch it and then they put those special steri strips and glue in it. But, and even at the hospital. And when I remember going there thinking, maybe someone will ask me, and then maybe I can tell, everyone's just like, oh, you fell over on a razor blade. Let's stitch you up and send you home. So And I think at that point, and I just felt trapped. And then I remember getting to boarding school, but I'd always felt like I was always such an ugly duckling. I had big glasses, HS glasses, like bottle tops. They were kind of white. And I used to lick my lips because they got really dry. And my mum hadn't thought to tell me about lip salve or, Vaseline or anything. So I just had this second set of enormous red lips around my lips. And I had buck teeth as well. So, I was the kind of ugly duckling, basically. And so I went off to boarding school and, was really nervous because I'd been at the same school since I was 4. And I'd struggled at school because I was ADHD, but undiagnosed. I was only diagnosed sort of 4 years ago. School was not a great place and I was bullied and, it wasn't a great place. But boarding school for 2 years, it was like a breath of fresh air. And I met this chap called Mark. Actually, he got talking to me. I fancied his best friend, but his best friend was like the hunk of the school. And I knew there was no way that either of them would really want to go out with me because I was this really ugly, damaged goods person. Because that's how I saw myself. Like, I'd figured out what I'd heard about what child abuse was by this time, and I'd shockingly and horrifiedly realized that was me, but hadn't told a single soul because I was just too ashamed, too mortified. And I I couldn't tell my mum. She just wasn't someone that she didn't talk. She never talked. She did her best, and she was an amazing woman. I always said my dad was a brilliant man, very bright, very intelligent, and my mum too. They were both dentists. My mum was like a doormat, and she was one of these people pleasers, and I learnt a lot of bad habits. Always, it's what's on the outside. If everyone thinks we're okay, we are okay. Okay. If don't let anyone know we're not okay, So basically, I was taught, like many of us, your feelings don't count. You don't matter. As long as the great big world outside thinks we're all a happy family, then everything is okay. And I guess that's where the trouble started, as well as the trauma from my abuse. But yeah, so this guy eventually kind of, after talking for, after school for like hours, over a period of month, eventually I plucked up the courage to tell him and was thinking he was going to then not want to talk to me. But by this time I thought, well, I've got to tell him because I'm damaged goods. I had no idea that of this concept that it wasn't any of his business. I felt like I've got to be open and honest about he might not want me because I'm damaged goods. Obviously, I have a very different opinion about that now, but at the time, I was trying to find my way on my own and not really anyone to talk to. And so I confessed to him, and it felt like a confession, and he didn't run away. And I think that was sort of probably the start of my healing journey in a sense, although he was a very, very damaged person as well. Anyone out there is used to going out with damaged people. I can't recommend a book enough. Women Who Love Too Much by Robin Norwood. Incredible book, absolutely incredible. I read it in my 20s. I was recommended by my psych tutor when I was in the army, doing my nurse training. But he was the son of an alcoholic, and actually I ended up going out with either people who had alcoholic parents or verging on alcoholism themselves. This was before I turned into an alcoholic. I'll tell you about that later. But yeah, so that was like a bit of a breakthrough for me, and realizing actually that if he could like me and not shun me or, be reviled by me, then maybe I was okay-ish, but still had no self-worth and, didn't really like myself very much. And then, kind of roll on. I think that also my perfectionism probably stemmed from there. Like, I've got to be better than everybody else because I'm a bit damaged and I've got to prove myself that I'm good enough. And again, I mean, really unhealthy coping strategy, but we're tiny, these little people that we were, they just did their very best to keep us safe. And I'm really proud of, well, not just who I am today, but that little girl that did so much to keep me safe, even though it didn't work out that well all the time. We were doing our best. I always sort of say that, and I have she's my friend now, and I do my very best to take care of her all the time, and when sort of she starts feeling, triggered or sad or whatever. But so then I ended up I got boarding school as a great relief because I was away from home. And then I literally went traveling for a year to Australia I went with my best friend, one of my best friends, and then we split up part way and I carried on traveling on my own, and then came back and joined the army because I guess I wanted to do my nurse training, and I also wanted to get away from home. So it seemed like and I love sport, so it seemed like the perfect combination. But of course that had its own issues with misogyny. And, I look back now and I literally wasn't abused. Like the hashtag Me Too nowadays, I had my bum pinched all the time. It was that era, but we were sort of told to put up with it. Like the wolf whistling, we were taught that was okay because that meant we were pretty and we should be really grateful. And I'm like, I know that now, and I'm like, how could we even have believed that? But it was indoctrinated into us. I got locked in the freezer with I was like 16 or maybe just 16 because I was 15 when I started to work at Pizza Hut in my first summer job before I went to boarding school. And I got locked in the freezer with a 26-year-old manager who was trying to snog me. And, and it was like, and I think he told them, "Oh, let us out in like 5 minutes," or whatever. It was a freezer, I think. Not a freezer, I think it was a fridge, walk-in fridge maybe, but it was cold in there, and I was terrified. But you just couldn't say anything. And because of my child and my upbringing, I just thought, well, I must have deserved it. And so and I went through, and I didn't have loads of relationships. I was quite picky about who I went with, but I always had this thing, oh, I better tell them before anything happens, that they might not want to be with me. And that's when I found this book, Robin Norwood, and my psych tutor recommended it when she came to tell me that she had a word with me, and my dad had had a heart attack. And so she said, oh, she told me that he'd had a heart attack. And my reaction was, oh, is he dead? And she said, no. And I said, oh, okay, thanks. Thanks for telling me. And I was about to toddle off out of the room, and she said, come back here. And told me about Robin Norwood's Women Who Love Too Much, and said, you should read it. So I read it and finished with the boyfriend I was at, and thought, oh, God, that was a close escape. And I'm like, I wish I'd read that book every time I finished with the boyfriend, read it again. Because every time I thought, I'm not falling into the same trap again. And every time I managed to fall into the same trap, but maybe slightly differently. So I was like, not going to get married and have children unless I completely was with someone that was really responsible. I desperately wanted children, but wasn't going to just have children for the sake of it. That felt, and I think for me, because of my damaged childhood, and I kept not getting married because I thought, no, they're not quite right, not quite right. And then I met this guy, and I thought, oh, this is it, I think. And we were 18 months before we got married, but he was deeply traumatized, and I knew it. And he hadn't done any work on himself. I had got into therapy at the age of 21, I think, when I read this book. Two things got me into therapy. The first one was this book. I realized that there was something a bit, I hadn't kind of got it all figured out. And secondly, I'd read somewhere that people who are abused have a higher chance of becoming abusers. Now, mostly it's men, and it's a very low percentage, but do you know what? It freaked the hell out of me. And I just thought, I never, ever, ever, I just couldn't even imagine that. And I don't think I ever would have, but even the thought that it was a possibility that I was at higher risk, just, I just like, I can't. I mean, one of the things that came out in therapy later on, when I was sobbing my heart out and I was doing some parts work, which is internal family systems. I don't know if you've come across that. Dick Schwartz wrote an incredible book called No Bad Parts, but it's a type of therapy where you connect with different parts. And I remember sobbing and going, I never want anyone ever to feel the way I did when I was a child. And I hadn't realized that that was such a big pattern for me. I was overcompensating, over-pleasing. I was a consummate people pleaser. And because the reason I realized behind that was because of my childhood. And I had this compassion in me that I didn't want anyone else to feel bad. So I took on the weight of the world so that other people wouldn't have to feel that. And it's just so unhealthy. But I didn't know that. That was my coping mechanism. I was in our household as well. I was only safe if everyone else was safe and happy. If dad wasn't shouting, if mum was okay, then I could be okay, sort of thing. And so I guess that translated into making sure everyone around me was okay before I would even feel safe. And so, so you do learn a lot through these self-development journeys. So roll on to my marriage. And so betrayal started with my mum and my dad. And then I got married. Within a few months of getting married, my husband just changed. Like, he was a high achiever, again, earning a six-figure salary. And I was a high earner too. I was an entrepreneur, as you said. I'd taken this business, and I think that was my thing, is if I can prove myself. So I'd gone from nursing and then ended up kind of accidentally with this job, because I went to a job centre with a friend, saw this job on the board and thought, oh, I want that job. That pays much better than what I'm on, and I'm bored with what I'm doing now. So let me see if I can apply for that. Went in to have what I thought was a chat, ended up with the job, and then ended up setting up a subsidiary company it was AIG, International American Group. I ended up setting up their in-house rehabilitation unit for car accidents at work and stuff. And so, I became a really high achiever, because that was a way of proving my worth, and, working long hours, and, nothing was too much. And I got rewarded for it, and I won awards, and, I was sort of like, oh my God, I'm kind of worthy in some way. And obviously that wasn't quite true either, but I did a really good job. By this point, I had got fed up working with it for a big insurance company, because it was all golden handcuffs. No one actually would rock the boat. No one had a mind of their own. It was always, let's just yes men, no men, three begs, four men. Loads of misogyny. And I just thought, fuck this, I'm going to do it myself. And I'd already resigned twice, and they kept saying, well, what will it take to keep you? And I was like, I have to do this every year just to get a salary increase and the head count. And the second year, I didn't even bother to ask for a salary increase, because I thought they're missing the point here. The people to work in my company, but you've got me tied to the headcount in a bigger company. And so I can't seem to get the staff, but I'm not only making you money, I'm saving you money. So this is not rocket science, boys, but it was obviously rocket science to them, because they didn't get it. So every year I'd have to resign to get the headcount I needed. And then in the third time I thought, fuck this, I'm going to do it myself. And so I just thought, right, I need to raise some money. I hadn't actually worked out how much until I did the Excel spreadsheets, remortgaged my flat in London and spent 6 months working out a business plan, learned how to use Excel, that's for sure, and eventually got £1 million and set up my own business. And that was the business that I turned into, 4 million. And I think there were two betrayals pretty close together, actually. So my husband went off the rails, stopped working. He was a contractor, but of course I hadn't quite realized at the time because he'd had a long contract while we were together. He'd been in 2 different contracts, but the last one was an 18-month contract. And I sort of, are you looking for another job? Because we're going to start a family. We were having 6 months before we got married. Anyway, we're going to start a family. But I'm not having a family if you're not working because I'm the breadwinner. Anyway, he didn't get a job. And in fact, I'd sold my flat and had the £35,000 deposit, like the money I'd earned, which was going to be a deposit on the next property. It turns out he didn't have any equity and he stopped working. And he'd wanted to rent a really fancy flat in Balham for the first year. We were together and he didn't have a bean to rub together. He had no equity, nothing, and literally burnt through 35 grand in 6 months. And then he was out partying and he just went completely off the rails. And then I think it was too much for him. He'd had a really traumatic childhood as well. And I think getting married just sent him into a spin, but he wasn't willing to do the work I was willing to stand by and we went to couples counselling. Couples counselling just said, get a job. And I said to him, I don't care if you sweep the streets, get a job in a pub. I don't care what you do. You've got to be working. It's not good for your mental health to not be at work when you're perfectly capable. And in the end, I had to knock that on the head because I was just like, I'd taken out a 10 grand loan then. So now I was 10 grand in debt with no assets at all. Moved to a village near one of my best friends and had to start over. But I had this business and one day we were about to do acquisitions. I'd just secured a second round of funding, an acquisition pot, another pot. And then my chairman turned up one day and said, oh, we're being put up for sale. I'm like, we've just put all this infrastructure in to do acquisitions. Tell me they're going to let us take that out before we go through the sale process because it won't be worth as much. He's like, no, it's a fire sale. So I've been, Capita hit off their English kind of business. And they'd said, Helen, give me first dibs. So I went back to them and said, we're being put up for sale, it's a fire sale. And they offered 6 million. I was like, oh my God, thank you. They turned it down. They turned down £6 million. And 18 months later, I bought the company for £1 when it was on its knees, but I didn't have the funds. I had no personal wealth, no equity in the business. I had equity, but it was worth nothing now. And so I had to bring in an investor who turned out to be Jekyll and Hyde. And he was, I think, being blackmailed by someone to tell me he was great when he wasn't. And he just wanted a man in my job. So in the end, I think it was about a year, 18 months after the sale, I actually couldn't work with this. He just kept trying to bring men in to do my job and sideline me. And to the point where that's when my drinking really started taking off. And I was just miserable. And it was really hard because I didn't want to let go. I'd set this company up from scratch. It'd be my baby. And yeah, I was just torn. And in the end, I had to walk away. And he was not a very nice man. And I didn't get anything really. It was just another betrayal, really, to add to the list. And you'd think, and I got back into therapy, and then met someone a year or so later and thought, oh my God, woohoo, seems like a really nice chap. And to be fair, this is the problem. I hadn't done enough therapy because he was a really nice chap, I guess. We were together for 17 years, but I should have known the first time he'd lied to me. He just like my dad. My dad was a consummate liar. And this man got angry as well, but I didn't see it in the beginning. And he told me he was divorced and we were both on a dating app. And I was only on this dating app to get my friend who lived across the road off my back. Because she said, if you don't start dating, I'm going to put you on that Date My Sad Single Friend website, whatever it's called. You put your friends on a dating app. I was like, oh Christ, I'm not doing that. And so I was in a hotel and on Friends Reunited, which was a long time ago, but it had collapsed by then, really. Facebook, I think, probably had taken over. Someone had sent me a message through this Friends Reunited. So as I was coming out trying to find this message, it said, join our dating app for free. I thought, oh God, I'll get nicks off my back. I'll sign up for that, do a couple of dates, and that'll be it. I'll be, she'll let me, I'll be off the hook. And he was the second date. Anyway, long story short, he wasn't divorced. He'd only left his wife. I didn't find this out for a lot longer afterwards, but he'd only left his wife 2 days. And to be fair, she had 3 affairs, which is why he'd left her. But still, 2 days before I met him for a date. So we were talking together on the phone for a couple of weeks while he was still with his wife. But I didn't find that out. I knew he wasn't divorced, but I hadn't found that bit out until I got a good long way down the line. And of course, the kids thought I was the wife. Well, the wife told the kids that I was the one that had broken up their relationship. So another betrayal, and he didn't stand up for me, said he didn't want the kids to be caught in a tug of war. So instead of telling his wife to tell them the truth, he just did nothing. And then we went through this whole thing. And I think I was pretty broken at this point, to be fair, because of what had happened with my business. I was really struggling. Kind of, I was in between, well, I wasn't quite in between jobs because I then got a consultancy job quite quickly, but it wasn't my dream. Yeah, I think I was just in a really bad place, and I just missed all the signs. And he would put me in the back of the car with the kids, not let me sit in the front. I know, and I'd try and challenge him on it, and it was, it was really difficult. Anyway, his wife wouldn't let me see the kids if she tried to stop me like being involved, and told the kids all that I was the reason, so they hated me anyway. So all this betrayal running through, and I hadn't even spotted it. And then I finished with him. There wasn't one final straw. I'm probably running out of time. I don't know how long I'm talking. Way too long, I think. But yeah, he wanted me to go with him to pick up his kids from his wife's wedding, and I said no. And he begged me and promised me I'd sit in the front. And then when I came out of going through a wee, his wife was then putting the kid in his car seat in the front of the car, and I was like, I'm done. But then I let him come back and roll on another 7 or 8, 9, and probably 10 years. He betrayed me again. And I'd finished with him probably 3 times in that time, just because his behavior was, not healthy, and he wouldn't really get into counseling. So I look back on my life, and it literally has just been one betrayal after another. But I've been really resilient, because every time I've learned something. Every time I've got back into therapy, done some more self-work. And this is where my shamanic path came in, because when I was first I'd always had, as you know, holistic. I did a diploma in complementary therapy, aromatherapy, reflexology, etc. When I left the army, because I like nursing, but I felt there was something missing. Like we were missing the point a bit, and we were kind of putting sticky plasters on instead of finding out what was really causing things to not go well. And I also felt that quite a lot of it was not in the mind, but was because of how we were. I could see that with me. Every time I'd take like 3 steps forward and 1 back, 3 steps forward, 2 back. 5 steps forward, only 1 back, 7 steps forward. It was really a jaggedy path getting to, and I felt that I was, thriving. There was always one area of my life that was going well. And, the betrayal didn't even stop there, because I took another company on to do a turnaround because their business was going bust. They found me, they headhunted me, and was a consultant for a while, then took over as managing director. And the guy there was a silent partner, and there was 2 of them. One was kind of a silent partner. He had his own business, and the other one was an occupational therapist, and he was incredible. So there was 3 of us. And then one of them, the guy that was the actual occupational therapist, left. So there was me and the silent partner. And then a few years ago, maybe 3 years ago, he decided, while I was on sabbatical, and bringing in a new MD so I can move up to chief exec and go part-time, because I'd invested a lot in the business, my time, and reducing my salary. He decided to take the business off me while I was, and we were like a virtual company. So there was no office I could go in and talk to the staff. They closed down all my systems. I couldn't talk to anybody. And I thought, it's all going to turn out right. I've done nothing wrong, And he used my ADHD as a weapon. That's when I got diagnosed with ADHD, and formally. But you know what? I say to people, I wouldn't wish my childhood or some of my adulthood on my worst enemy, but I wouldn't change it for the world. I think that's half of being resilient, isn't it? That you just learn from your mistakes. And even if I haven't learned 100%, let's hope if I do decide to have another relationship, that I learn a lot more than I did in the previous one. But I was with my last partner for 17 years, and I have learned an awful lot about myself in that time.
Well,
So I probably talk too much. Let me stop.
No, I was just going to say each event that's traumatic to us is an opportunity for us to learn and grow. And you clearly have shown through your lifetime of trauma and learning that you have used those moments to grow. And yeah, you said 17 years, and you repeated some of these same, but we keep learning the lesson until we've learned the lesson, and then we can move forward and learn new lessons.
And like for me, forgiveness, like I call it a medicine because it is a medicine. Like when I forgave my parents and learned what forgiveness really means, because I think people get mixed up with forgiveness. They think, well, if I forgive that person, then I've said it's okay what they did. And that is absolutely not what forgiveness is about. But it's a very understandable misnomer, about forgiveness. But when I could truly forgive my parents, truly forgive myself, and truly forgive people that came into my life that hurt me, I could then use that as medicine to help other people. And I run forgiveness retreats, and I've had people come who've been abused, as I was as a child, And they came back twice. And the second time they were able to truly forgive. They're not the first time. It was a weekend retreat. They'd started the process. They went off and did more work. And they said, I'm coming back next year. I'm like, it's the same retreat. I haven't done a level 2 yet. And they were like, no, well, I will have missed half of it anyway. I want to come back. And actually 2 people came back. And one of the girls forgave her father and her mother for the abuse as well. And when things like that happen, the joy that comes into my heart, not because of what happened to them, but because of the medicine of forgiveness and helping other people to heal, I couldn't have done that work if I hadn't had to do the forgiveness myself.
Oh, exactly. Well, and as you were talking about your childhood, I wrote down the word lonely. It seemed like when you were carrying this burden of the sexual abuse and you were hoping that somebody would ask you about it, that had to have been a terribly lonely time in your life especially when you realized that your mom knew and didn't protect you because you did say, yeah, we expect our mothers to be protective and like in the animal kingdom, most animal moms are
Yeah.
fiercely protective of their young. And I mean, I know I was fiercely protective too. And to have that betrayal and I mean, just a lonely time to feel like you aren't safe in your own home and that your parents are one's harming you and one's not protecting you from harming and turning that blind eye that you said. And I can't even imagine what it took for you to be able to forgive. And how long did it take you to be
Okay.
able to forgive them for yourself? I mean,
Yeah.
we talk about forgiveness a lot of times and people think it's to let the other people off the hook, but
No.
forgiveness is the benefit to ourselves so that we can let go of that pain that's associated with them.
Yeah.
So
It is. I
talk
mean,
a little bit about that.
yeah. Do you know one thing that's just struck me when you said about that, about how lonely it was? Like, I guess hearing it reflected back really, and one of the things I'm really passionate about is community. And I wonder if that's why, because, I mean, I was too young to have a community. Do you know what I mean? But if I had, I mean, my grandparents all died when I was younger. Maybe that's how my dad knew he could get away with it. I don't know, because I was so close to my grandmas. I think sometimes things that happen to us, I'd never even connected the dots, but I think I'm so passionate about community, building community, making people feel like they're in a community, whether it was at work or wherever, with my healing and my retreats and stuff. But so your question was about forgiveness. So with my father, I I think it was, I can't remember when I knew, but I knew I had to try and forgive him. And we had a women's, we called it a healing circle. And this was like years and years ago, before healing circles were even a women's circle thing. But a whole bunch of us friends used to get around my flat, do a few oracle cards. They were pretty new at the time. And then we would just talk about, mostly we would kind of moan about the men in our lives or whatever was going on at work or whatever it was. But it was a really good opportunity to just get things off our chest in a really safe environment. And I'd read this book. That's right. I'd read this book. And I can't remember what book it was. I wish I could tell you. But it was a spiritual book. And it was talking about, it might come to me, but I haven't thought about it for years. But it was talking about forgiveness. And it had a little forgiveness ritual in it. And I thought, I need to forgive my father. And, he'd done a lot of other things in later. I mean, I had a knife on him in the kitchen and I confronted him and I didn't tell you this bit, so many bits about my story, but he came after me. This was way after the abuse. I was terrified of him even then. And I ran into the kitchen and grabbed a knife because I thought, I've got to defend. I was 16. I thought, I've got to defend myself. Maybe 15, actually. I think it was just before I went to boarding school. I can't remember. It was somewhere between 16 and 17. And I held this knife up and I said, don't you come anywhere near me. I was really brave. And I was like, I'll never forget what you did to me as a child, like this. That was all I said, those words. And he turned around to me and said, that was your sick fantasy. And at that moment, I literally threw the knife on the floor and ran out of the house, ran to my best friend's house. And I thought, oh my God, he's just admitted it. It was like, I was so galled by his audacity to say that. But at the same time, I thought, you've just admitted it, because how did you know what I was talking about? You do so many horrible things to me. It could have been any one of a number, but you went straight for that. And I was like, you just, like, it's not like you don't know. And so anyway, I never really had to have anything to do with him again, really. And, because I went off to boarding school and traveling and then the army and then bought a flat in London. But yeah, but I just felt like I needed him. What I didn't tell you was my dad had a stroke and there was no one else to look after him. My mum didn't want a bar of it. She'd divorced him by this point. He had no friends. My brother lived in New Zealand, got as far away as he possibly could. So it was just me. And I felt obliged because I was his daughter He was with me when he had the stroke. I agreed. I got kind of bullied into seeing him by my brother and my mother. My brother at the time didn't know about the abuse, and my mum did. But they're like, "Oh, well, couldn't you just see him once in a while? He really misses you." And I was like, anyway, not colluded. I agreed I would see him once a month at this Chinese restaurant with a friend, so I didn't have to be on my own with him or anything. And again, I wish I'd known that I didn't have to say yes. But at that time, I felt such pressure by all these people that were supposed to love me to appease my father because he missed me. Like he had any fucking right to me. He lost all his rights. But I was at that age and I was made to feel, and I didn't have the tools in my toolkit at that point that I needed to have. So I'd have to take him shopping. And anyway, I used to get so irritated with him. And that's when I knew something had to change because I couldn't continue like this. I mean, so I said to my girlfriends, "Come, we got to do this ritual." So we did this forgiveness ritual. And the next day I had to take him shopping. And he said to me, "Oh, there's something different about you today." And I was like, "Oh, really? What's that?" He said, "Oh, there's a different light in your eyes." And it was the weirdest thing he'd ever said to me. And I was just like, I was a bit like, anyway, do you know what? It made a difference. I was able to just do what I had to do. I managed to somehow put my boundaries in, and I only saw him when it was absolutely necessary. So that was when I forgave my father. Then I had to forgive my mother, which was a lot kind of harder actually. And I didn't find out until my late 20s that she already knew because I told her in the kitchen, thinking when I was a bit drunk one time, thinking that, I plucked up the courage to tell her. And she said, "Oh, yeah, I always suspected that had happened." I was floored. But anyway,
I
what did
can't
I
even
do?
imagine.
No, but
Yeah,
what
I
did I
can't.
do? Did I say to her, "Well, whatever"? No, I didn't. I said, "Oh, don't worry, don't worry." I ended up feeling sorry for her. That's where trauma takes you, is suddenly, that over compassion. So I don't do that anymore. I have compassion for myself and I put myself first, and that's the most important thing. But yes, I did manage to forgive her, and she died of cancer. She married a very narcissistic man who tried to stop us having any relationship at all. And then he tried to stop me going to see her on her deathbed, but luckily a few people intervened, so I got to say goodbye to her. And she said the last thing she said to me is it all right with us? She said, "I love you." And I said, "Yes, Mum,
Oh.
I love you too." So, but it did set me free. Forgiveness does set you free. It really does, because it stops going around in your head. I know when I've forgiven someone fully, it's when none of those thoughts enter my head. I might talk about it, but it doesn't trigger me. I don't have that reaction. I can talk about all of these people without, affecting my body. I don't get those horrible reactions, that sicky stomach or the horrible heartbeat or the racy head or the thoughts going round and round. That's when I know I've done complete forgiveness. And with the bloke that took the business off me recently, even in a forgiveness retreat, I said to my friend, "There's still a bit hanging on there because I'm still, why did they do that? How could they do that to me?" And then I did a put yourself in someone else's shoes, and we did a role play, and I realized he was just greedy and afraid, and I was able to let it go. And it does really sets you free, and that's
So
kind of
when you
part of the experience.
and when you're talking about and describing the way you forgave your dad and your mom, it sounds like to me there's a distinction. You did the forgiveness with your dad privately with just yourself. You did not actually tell your dad you forgave him. And I think that's a really important topic to talk about with this audience because most of us grow up thinking and we're taught in order to forgive someone, we have to say, "I forgive you."
You
And
don't.
and when I was brought up, forgiveness was all about the other person, absolving them from their
Yeah,
sin or what they had done wrong. But forgiveness is not that.
it
Forgiveness
isn't.
is, and I love that you teach that forgiving without having that other party that,
Yeah.
you
They
know,
don't need to know. Forgiveness is it really is about setting us free, because quite often what goes round in our head in a loop is that, why did they do this to me? And we make it kind of like it was our fault. Like, you're trying to find out what was wrong with you for them to behave that way about you. And when you reframe that and realize, with this, I'm in AA now because of my alcoholism, but we have a saying, hurt people. And I say to people, look, no one wakes up in the morning who's feeling good, who's got their shit together and, is doing all right. No one's, we're all thriving or surviving. But people who are hurting lash out because they can't keep it inside. I mean, some people do and they end up drinking like I did. They punish themselves. Other people punish others. But no one who is well and balanced and mentally really healthy does things like that. We do that because we've been wounded as children. Like, my wounds have been turned inwards. So in my alcoholism, stuffing down my feelings because I couldn't bear to feel them, over compassion, over giving, people pleasing. I mean, those are all unhealthy coping mechanisms. And it's just as unhealthy as going to punch someone in the head because you're so angry with them because you get triggered by something that they have said, which was a thick throwback from your childhood. That we're all just doing the best we can with what we've got. And some behavior is unacceptable, some's unlawful, and some's just not very good, whether it's towards ourselves or towards others. And so when we reframe things to think actually that wasn't about me. Dad was abusing me probably because he'd been abused. I mean, I don't know because I don't know the family history and everyone's dead in my family. But someone doesn't start doing that because they're healthy and well. And so then you can start not over compassioning, but just going, okay, yeah, actually, why would someone do that if they were okay with themselves and loving themselves and being, honoring themselves? They wouldn't do that. Doesn't mean it's right. Doesn't mean they had any right to do it. But it does mean that you can start to allow that tiny bit of compassion for them because you see them as a little child who was being abused or treated badly or beaten up, whatever it was. And their expression of that is just coming out because they didn't have the right healing tools. They weren't giving counseling, they weren't giving therapy. No one listened to them. They were shut in a cupboard or whatever it was. And so then you can stop thinking it's all about you and actually it's all about them. And that's their shit and they shouldn't do it and they need to get therapy or help or some way of getting themselves out of that. But once you can realize that it wasn't you personally, because we take things personally, and it's normally not personal. If it wasn't you, it would have been the next person in the line. It was whoever they happened to bump into that day. And then when you can know yourself and know that you actually are a divine being, we're all meant to be here. We're all here to learn. There's a lovely story actually that I share in the retreat. Or there's a lovely book actually by Neil Donald Walsh called The Little Boy in the Sun. But it's a similar thing. If you imagine like all these souls are sitting or waiting around at the bus stop to come down to earth, right? And they're all chatting about what's their soul's purpose, why are they coming to earth. And someone says, oh, I'm going to practice kindness, and I'm going to do level 5, out of 10, I'm going to do that. Oh, that's where I'm at. Someone says, what about you? Well, I'm doing level 10 forgiveness. And everyone takes a breath in. Ooh, who's being your level 10 companion? Because for you to be able to work on level 10 forgiveness, someone's got to do a level 10 misdemeanor to you to be able to work on it. It's the light and the dark, and so, when you frame it like that, and that's what this lovely book is about, actually, I'll try and make sure I get you details for the show notes because I read it at my bedtime reading for the first night because it really makes everyone cry and everyone's like, this little boy, the book's slightly different, but it's the same story. Little boys like, saying, well, you promise you'll remember who I am when I do that bad deed I've got to do, you'll remember I'm just doing this to help you learn and grow because that's what you wanted. And like everyone's in tears because it's like, yeah, you can't, if someone's not there from you to learn, like all the people in my life, all the betrayal, all everything, they've all taught me something. They've taught me something about myself that was missing, that I needed to work on and that I needed to put back in, whether that was self-worth, self-love, self-respect, and also what I needed to stop giving away. Too much of me, too much compassion, too much kindness, over helping. We haven't got time but today, but I learned a very, very hard lesson in rehab about over helping. I didn't understand that sometimes you can help when you offer help, it's not always helpful. A whole new concept to me.
Well, there's
Interfering, it could be called, even if you've
yeah.
been asked for it. Yeah.
Yes, and there's also overly responsible. That was one of my traits that got me through my childhood. I was overly responsible. So try to take a high achiever and take some overly responsible behaviors away. That was hard.
Oh my
Yes.
God.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
So
that
let's
parentified children often end up, being over responsible because they have to take charge or hold things together sometimes. I mean, AA is full of people who've had really, difficult childhoods. And, like so many people, I said I was never going to turn out like my father or never going to turn out like my mother. And then, you end up, I mean, no one was a massive, I mean, my uncle was an alcoholic actually, so possibly did run in the family, but he killed himself and that was another trauma. It was because I always wished he was my dad. He lived in Australia. I stayed with him just before he killed
mm,
himself. And he begged me to stay. And I had this boyfriend in England. He begged me to come home and then dumped me. It was another betrayal. Literally begged me to come all the way home. I really wanted to stay in Australia and literally got home and he wasn't even there. Like he turned up to meet me at the airport and then disappeared. Another betrayal, and he was another child of an alcoholic. So yeah, I'm working on that. I'm a work in progress, like all of us, but it's progress, not perfection, right?
Right.
And as long as you can laugh and you've got people to share your misery with, I mean, not big pity parties, like a momentary pity party, and you
Right.
allow yourself to grieve, because that was the other thing. This 17 relationship, although I knew it wasn't right. I knew I had to let myself grieve for everything that I had lost during that time, as well as the relationship. And probably I had to do more grieving for myself and what I'd given away during that time, and really be kind to myself about that. And sort of, I've stopped all the negative self-talk. And if occasionally I catch myself, I do a control alt delete and I say to myself, I didn't mean to say that. That just came out of my mouth. What I meant to say was, we didn't, if I say, oh God, I'm such an idiot. That's such a common thing, isn't it? Oh God, I'm such an idiot. I say, I'm not an idiot at all, actually. I just made a small mistake, and now I've made that, I probably won't make it again. So, haha, let's carry on with our day.
That's a great reframe reminder.
Yeah, control alt delete and just say, rewire those beautiful neural pathways. And I very rarely catch myself now ever saying anything unkind to myself.
Awesome.
I mean, I do crazy things. I've got ADHD. Like, I forget everything. Like, I lost my car keys the other day, and I was looking for them for an hour, half an hour. I thought it was going to be late. I'd left half an hour extra time because I'm always, I'm so paranoid about being late. And eventually I'd given up, and I thought, I'm just going to go and sit down and just ask Spirit to help me find them. And I shut the door, and they were in the door. I'd
Oh,
searched my
perfect.
woodland for miles to try and find them. And I just had to laugh. I literally just laughed at myself and said, well, remember next time to check the door first, shall we?
You never know where you're going to find stuff.
No,
One of the
never.
things that came up, and we talked about this yesterday in your podcast, is things don't happen to us, they happen for us. So let's talk about that just for a couple of minutes.
Really believe that. And I've believed that since I was very young. But when I first read about that concept, I actually got things a bit confused for a short time, because I'd been abused, and I believed that my soul had chosen this incarnation to come in and learn these lessons. That's why I feel that life happens for us, not to us, because it presents all these opportunities for us to grow and to learn. But I did have, and I just kind of want to warn the audience, in case there's anyone out there that might be feeling the same, was that because I knew that my soul had chosen this incarnation, I got a bit confused. I was like, why did I choose to be abused? There must be something wrong with me. And I felt full of shame and like, oh my God, I must be a really terrible person. Why would I choose that? And then I realized that I hadn't chosen that. I'd chosen something that would help me forgive. And actually that was just what was there to help me. But for a while, like in my 20s, I'd seen so many people who had been, suddenly it started coming out. You tell one person, then someone else says, oh my God, my friend was, and you suddenly realize there's a lot of us who've been abused. Like, it's not that, it's common, sadly, very sadly. But a lot of the people that I was hearing about who had been abused were taking drugs, drinking really heavily, had bulimia or anorexia. There was some very visible sign. And I looked like I was fine on the outside. I wasn't drinking too much. I mean, I was, but no more than most 20-year-olds when they go out and party on a Friday night. I mean, I wasn't drinking alcoholically at that point. I wasn't taking any drugs. I didn't have anorexia or bulimia. The bulimia came later. And that's another thing that I managed to that was my shamanic path that got me through that, actually. Every time I went on because the shamanic training is about personal development just as much as it is about learning the tools, the indigenous tools of healing, really, from across the whole world, including our country here. But yeah, so I was like, oh my God, and then, well, careful what you wish for. I was thinking, oh, I'm not that bad. But it was just that I was holding all together. Like, inside I was a mess, but on the outside, I looked to all into, I know I was a high flyer, high achiever, setting up these companies. I'm like, there must be something wrong with me. I'm not ill enough to have been abused, kind of thing. And it's a really weird head mess up thing. But of course, I was just holding it together. And then the wheels started coming off, bulimia, anorexia, cutting, suddenly things, sort of escalated. And I have to say, I do believe it happened for me, because without all of that, I wouldn't be who I am today. And actually, at the age of 56, although it probably happened a bit earlier than that, I actually really, really not just like who I am, but I really love who I am. And I wouldn't change me for the world. I mean, I've got quirks and I've got things that aren't particularly great, but I kind of love my quirkiness and my weirdness, and I'm just really comfortable in my skin, and I don't care what other people think of me. And that was my biggest gift to myself, is there's a saying in AA, what other people think of you is none of your business. And I remember hearing it thinking, what And then penny drops, and I'm like, you're right. What other people think of me is none of my business. And why should I care? If I'm
Right.
okay with me, why should I care what other people think? That's their problem, not mine. And that was a real revelation. I have to say the steps in AA. I mean, I always used to say, everyone should get to do the steps, even if they're not an alcoholic or have got some kind of anonymous, go to some anonymous, because they really are powerful healers as well. And I just feel I've been gifted all these tools through my life to get where I am today. And I feel like I've been thriving even since my 20s, as I said, taking this step approach to getting to where I needed to be. And it's a journey, not a destination. I always say, what are we going to do if we get there? I mean, okay, if we get enlightened, we probably don't have to worry about that. But honestly, if it was just a destination, we'd get there and be like all on our own, just looking around going, oh, anyone else around? No one else made it?
Well, we get there
Lonely.
and then
We don't need it.
the target moves and
Yeah.
then we have to go through something else. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's
So
continuous.
you speak of your AA, and we talked about this yesterday. You are 10 years sober coming up.
Yeah, in 4 days'
Nine,
time, 19th
4
of
days.
April, I will be 10 years sober. I had a few slips on the way, came out of rehab on my pink fluffy cloud, and then, yeah, life happened and I kind of fell off the wagon a little bit, and then I got back on and then fell off. And then what got my I didn't get step 1, and that's the most important step. You can't, I thought I had, but I actually hadn't, which is being powerless. And because of me not wanting to feel powerless, because I'd already always felt powerless. Like in my life, I had been powerless over my father and all that sort of thing. And now I was running my own business, I'm not powerless, I would say. This poor woman, in the rehab. And then in the end, she just gave up with me. And then when I did the steps with the sponsor, when I got, out of rehab, I was like, oh, yeah, I get that. I'm powerless over alcohol. But I don't think I really got it until I was about to get my driving license back. I lost my driving license for drinking. And that was, yeah. Anyway, I won't go into that story. But when I was due to get it back, I had to have a blood test to prove that you're not drinking anymore, kind of thing. And I just had a wee slip, which is never a wee slip, it just gets worse and worse. But I was literally just having the odd little glass, miniature bottle of wine every now and again. But it wasn't going to stay like that, But I thought, well, that's fine because that letter's coming. And as soon as I get that letter, I'll be able to stop drinking. And I couldn't. And that's when I realized I was powerless over alcohol. I wanted something so badly, but alcohol was more powerful than me because I couldn't stop having that 1 or 2 little bottles. And I fessed up in AA, went back and said, I'm really sorry, I've had a relapse. And they took me under their wing. Don't worry, just keep coming back, they say. And I kept going back, and I'm still going back. And I go back now because of the newcomers, because if everyone that got sober left and didn't really need AA anymore, who would be there for the people that are just coming in? I needed all those old timers that I could see that they could get 10 years. I don't know how I was going to get through the next day, never mind 10 years. And now it's the biggest blessing of my whole life. I just never would. I don't even crave alcohol. I don't think about it. It doesn't even enter my head. And I feel very blessed that I don't have to drink today because it's given me my life back, really, after that. It was a very short period where I was drinking alcoholically, but it was hideous.
Thank you for sharing that. It's a very special topic for me, what I've been
Yeah.
through in my life. So thank you for that.
And also, I mean, how crazy it is, one of the worst illnesses, I believe, because I was in all other aspects of my life, I could control things. But I would be in the morning trying to get a drink down me to stop the heaves, the dry heaves, and you'd be trying to get and I only ever drunk, I was a posh alcoholic, I only drank cava or white wine. And trying to get a drink down you to stop heaving and to stop the shakes, it was a miserable. I wanted to kill myself. I really did. But I just couldn't because I didn't want to leave that because my uncle had killed himself. I couldn't do that to people, that I would leave behind. And I was in a rock and a hard place. I just kept praying I would die.
We're
So
glad that you're here and
yeah,
that
me too. Oh my God. Like I can't
you
imagine if I
have
yeah. I mean, it just
had
seems so
yes,
no,
and think of all the wonderful
I
things you've
know.
learned and all the people you've helped. Let's shift gears and let's talk about your herbal medicine. And let's first talk about cacao because that is something that is new and interesting to me.
So, well, I got into cacao about 10 years ago. A friend dragged me along to a cacao ceremony, and the lady that was running it ended up being my teacher. And I'd never heard of it either. It's raw chocolate, but absolutely pure raw chocolate. And it has amazing properties in it. So it's very healthy for you, but I won't go into all the health benefits because you can easily Google that. But it's got serotonin and dopamine in it, which is neurotransmitters, which people put in SRIs to help, you feel good. Feel good. enzymes. And it also has this beautiful molecule called anandamide. And if anyone out there does any Sanskrit chanting, you'll know that ananda means bliss. It's the bliss molecule. So it kind of makes you feel warm and fuzzy. And everyone is not hallucinogenic, it's perfectly safe. You wouldn't give a ceremonial dose to a child just because they're smaller, but a grown-up ceremonial dose is between sort of 40 and 50 grams, normally just with water. But if you're if you're not using it in a very specific way, you can put oat milk or nice things in it, but it is very powerful. And I run cacao ceremonies that are sort of 2.5 hour guided meditations where people get to meet their higher self, like your soul essence, so you can communicate with your soul essence. And also you can meet other guides along the way. We call it the spirit of mother cacao, so the spirit of the medicine. And so you get to ask questions, set an intention, ask questions of people. Sometimes you meet power animals, which are guides for us. So it's a whole sort of almost 2 hour guided meditation where you go through all this. It go through like a journey. I take you on a guided journey, and you can get answers. People come in with all kinds of things about work. Mostly it's work, relationships, health, home. Where you live. Those tend to be oh, I'm thinking of changing jobs. I don't know what to do, and I want guidance and inspiration about what I should do. So you set an intention at the beginning, and then I take you on this guided meditation. But people use it in all other ways as well. People use it with sound, with yoga. People are using cacao a lot these days with all different modalities. For me to and the way I serve it is very Western. In the indigenous cultures, they drink cacao. It's again sacred and revered. But of course, the chocolate industry just wiped all the farmers out because they paid a pittance for the cacao, and then the farmers didn't have enough money to properly So it's sad because there's definitely a dark side of chocolate, I have to say. I haven't got time to go into that now, but it can be very, very powerful. I had an ayahuasca shaman who I'd taken ayahuasca with. And I kept saying to him, come to a cacao ceremony. He's like, oh, Helen, I do ayahuasca. Why would I want to come to a cacao ceremony? And I'm like, it's a different medicine and it's just as powerful, just in a different way. And just because it's not hallucinogenic, I said, you can come for free, just come. And he did come, bless him. And then he went, oh my God, that was not what I was expecting. And it's because it just kind of thins the veil between us and the spirit world. It lets us relax and stop worrying and stops our mind churning. And that was quite funny. And I also had an indigenous guy. He was a Mexican, but he was a white Mexican. But he trained with the Toltecs and the Mayans for 7 years out in the wilderness. And I hadn't realized any of this, of course. And he ended up in my wood. Long story, I'm not going to go to it. But I'd said to him, oh, if you're around, I'm having a cacao ceremony on Sunday in the woods, because he was staying in my wood. And he said, oh, that'd be lovely. Yeah, I'd love to come. And at lunchtime, just before we went to lunch after the ceremony, I said, has anyone else got anything they want to say? And he pipes up and goes, yes, I trained with cacao, with the Mayans and the Toltecs. And honestly, I just wanted the whole ground to open up and swallow me. And I was just like, that's nice. I'm like, what the hell is he going to say? And actually, he was so lovely. He said, I really like the way you honor the medicine and its indigenous roots, but you make it very Western. It's the most powerful ceremony I have done. That's because they don't do cacao ceremonies like I do, or the people that have been trained with my teacher, Rebecca Shaman. But they tend to use fire, and they use it as an offering. So they will respect the cacao, they will drink the cacao, but it's all around the fire and making offerings to the fire and stuff. So it's a very different way of serving it. But I'm taking a group of people to Guatemala next January to train people in the way I run cacao ceremonies. And we're going to go and visit all the sacred sites, go and see. Guatemala is so beautiful. We're going to meet the cacao, meet the farmers, watch how it's made and grown, and also go and see the sacred sites, Tikal and, Ixray, and all different sacred sites, all the pyramids and all the, beautiful sacred sites out there, and also the nature, because Guatemala is beautiful. So I'm very excited about that because I love teaching people. So yeah. And then the mushrooms was an accident. If you'd have asked me 3 years ago, would I be, or maybe 3 years ago, I would be working with mushrooms, I would have literally laughed at myself so much I'd have fallen off the chair. But Spirit had another idea. I was in the ayahuasca ceremony. I only ever did 2. They were about 8 years apart. And the second one, at the end of it, I was still umming and ahhing whether to do it. It's just that I brought this shaman in my woodland to make sure people were safe, because so many people were asking me to do ayahuasca. And I don't serve that medicine. You have a lot of training, and, it needs to be in a really safe environment. But so, yeah, and I was in the ceremony and I was umming and ahhing. At the last minute, I decided to do it. And just towards the end of the ceremony, mother, we call her grandmother ayahuasca, she said, this isn't your medicine. And I was like, I kind of knew that. And she said, no, it's mushrooms. And I was like, God, okay. And I was so terrified that I just ignored it until I was in a cacao ceremony. I was running it, and I always get about 5 minutes to have a little chat with Mother Cacao when everyone else is deep in their journey talking to Mother Cacao too. I was about to ask a question. And she said, "What's happening with the mushrooms?" Like in my head, like she was talking to me. And I was like, "You as well? Is there a conspiracy up there?" And anyway, it was so weird because it coincided with me losing this job or, having the business taken off me. It's 6 years I built that business up. But anyway, they did have to give me a payout because it was illegal, but it just wasn't anywhere close to what I invested and certainly didn't compensate me for 50% of the business. But anyway, I took the money because I didn't have any other option because I didn't have enough money to, you know, go to court. And so we settled out of court and I very wisely spent it exploring mushrooms because I was clearly told by spirit that's what I was supposed to do. And I took them clinically, shamanically, and kind of somewhere in betweeny. And the shamanic, it was beautiful, but it was very noisy and there was no pre-questionnaire. There was no real integration. The clinical didn't really honor the medicine. And I've been taught these medicines are sacred. You've got to honor the medicine. Like we can't just take them for granted or just take them and think, that's okay. And so there wasn't really the honoring. And then the last one I did while I was on my big journey of like all these different types of mushroom ceremonies, all these different types of people, they said, "You're to bring the clinical and the shamanic together. That's your job." I was like, "Oh God." Anyway, I did some training. I know I've done some training. I've done a lot of research and most of it was guided by spirit. And so that's what I do. I run retreats where we bring all the rigors of the clinical. So people have to do questionnaires, have, talks with me. And if there's any questions, they have to talk with the therapist as well. I'm not a qualified therapist. And then we do integration. We do the ceremony. It's very ceremonial, very sacred. And then we do integration. And then there's follow-up calls if people need them afterwards. Just honoring the medicine while really taking care of people. Like set and setting is so important. And people are kind of hearing about these medicines and sort of just going off and doing them. And actually the medicine might be fun while you do it, but you do need to integrate it because it does change our brain. The neural pathways can be rewired with psilocybin. And actually, I've got my psilocybin t-shirt on, I believe. Psilocybin access rights, because it's still illegal in this country. um, I'll chance it. But yeah, so I trademarked the word shamanical, which is shamanic, clinical, magical, all rolled into one.
Well, it's pretty impressive, all the recovery you've done and that your healing journey, and you've come so far from that 8-year-old girl who didn't know how to speak up for herself. And now look at where you are today. Look at what you're doing for yourself and protecting your boundaries and for all of the healing that you emphasize and for yourself and other people. And I
Yeah.
love that you're reaching out and I know this is really congruent with the 11th and 12th steps of the AA program is, and you can tell me which one is which, but
Yeah.
giving to other people.
Passing the
Really
wisdom on.
say that again?
Passing the wisdom on, like, we
Yes.
get well and then it's our responsibility to help others to get well. Like we need to pass it on, pass it forward. And, when the business was taken off me, everyone said to me, "Helen, this is spirit telling you you've got to get out there and do your healing full time. It shouldn't be a hobby. It should be your full-time job." And I knew that. So, and then my relationship fell apart and I didn't have a home and I didn't have a job. And I mean, I had a job. I didn't have a business. I had no income. And I just trust spirit, and it's not let me down. Like I'm as poor as a church mouse right now, but I'm very rich in terms of money, but I'm very rich in every other way. And I now live off grid in my wood because I didn't actually have anywhere else to live, but I love it. It's been my biggest healer. Nature is one of the biggest healers. And, if you can't afford therapy, get out in nature. They talk to the trees and they do talk back.
And speaking of trees, and I know you've rattled off a lot of different books, and I'll have all the books in the show notes, but The Secret Life of Trees.
I know. The mycelium.
My goodness, what a powerful book.
I know. I've got 4 trees on my land. Well, actually, they're in the farmer's field, but I kind of count it as my land because I walk it every day, and he lets me. I've got walking rights, and there are 4 oak trees in a sort of almost like a quarter of a semicircle, and they're all right next to each other. And I've named 2 of them because they're really my allies. One's Stanley. Now, trees don't have sex; they're both male and female, but some for me have a more masculine energy, and some have more feminine. So Stanley and Cecilia, and I hug all 4 of them, and there's a little hawthorn that I call Spiky because he's very spiky. And there's a couple of there's a hazel and a willow in there as well. But I give them all a hug in the morning. And when I'm away, I find a really beautiful tree wherever I am. And I've got a park right here. And there's this incredible cedar of Lebanon who has been my tree. I mean, I've hugged all the trees here, but I put my head on the tree and I say, "Send love back to my trees. Tell them I'm thinking of them." And it goes into the mycelium and that energy because of consciousness gets to them. So we're all connected. Everything's connected, whether it's consciousness, mycelium. I mean, mushrooms are great, aren't they? They connect everything. It's like the interweb. Yeah.
And what are your last words of wisdom that you want to share with the listeners today? And also, before we finish, how people can reach out to you, connect with you.
Okay, so let me do my words of wisdom first. The best advice I could give anyone is to love yourself more than you love anyone else, and be kind to yourself. Don't allow yourself to be negative self-talk. Don't be unkind to yourself. And try really hard. It's not always easy to put your boundaries in, um, and stick to them. However awful it sometimes feels when you're learning how to put boundaries in, that's the best guidance, because you alone know what is good for you and what's not good for you. And if you don't, speak to someone if you can afford it. Otherwise, read a load of books, libraries and charity shops. How to get hold of me? The best way to get hold of me is to WhatsApp me, actually, because my ADHD, I kind of forget to check emails, and I have got an Instagram page, Helen's _ inspired _ healing. I do check the messages there mostly, but it could take me a while because sometimes I forget, and then I realize I haven't checked them, and then there's a whole load of them. I get a bit overwhelmed, and the same with emails. But you can reach me on helen@inspiredhealing.co.uk. But the very best way is to WhatsApp me, +44 7971 798 462. I'd love to hear from you. And I also have a podcast. If you want to be a guest and you've got a surviving to thriving story, you can call me about that too.
Perfect. Perfect. You'll have to take a look at all the guests on my show because
Yeah.
there are a lot of guests that are thriving.
Yeah. That's the magic,
Absolutely.
isn't it? That's what you and I are here to do, is to help people. I do believe it helps people hear other people's stories, because then they think, you know what, if she can do it, I can do it.
That's right. And you mentioned something about somebody encouraging you to turn your healing from a hobby to a business. And that's exactly how I got onto my resilience
Yeah.
as a vocation, not just a passion, but a full on business, because I had done so much recovery in my own journey,
Yeah.
and people just kept telling me how resilient I am, how resilient and how inspiring I am. And so finally I said, okay, fine. All right, universe, I'm doing it. And I totally switched gears, and here I am. This is episode 21 that we're
So,
recording right now. And just to think, like 5 months ago, I had zero.
yeah. It's
And
incredible. Today is my 1 year anniversary of my podcast.
congratulations.
It was about starting my business. Like, I knew it too, but it's quite a big step to go from a big salary to not knowing where your next penny's coming in. And that's where you have to trust in the universe. Because I really felt that was what the universe was saying: Helen, get on and do your healing. Friends told me, and I kind of was like, yeah, you're right. But it's scary not having that to fall back on. Oh, that's what I was going to say. Sorry, really quickly. That's why I keep my toe in with the non-exec director work, because I had some really crappy non-exec directors that were no use. Much use as a chocolate teapot, we say in England sometimes. And I didn't want anyone else to be in that position, and especially women, because it was misogynistic. And because I was a young woman in a man's business world, oh, she doesn't know, we'll just tell her what to do, and then not listen to a word I said. And then every time it would go wrong because they weren't listening. So anyway, I'll leave it there.
We could get on our soapboxes.
Oh, we could. Don't let me. Right. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. It's been lovely. And thank you for the listeners who are listening. Or you're watching. You get to watch. I keep forgetting. Mine's an audio only. I'm not brave enough to do the whole picture thing.
Well,
One
maybe
day.
now, after today, you will be. And do you have any free resources for the audience today? Anything on your website that you can
Well, there's
invite them
lots of
to?
information on my website, actually. Lots of stuff about shamanism, lots of stuff about cacao ceremonies, how to run your own cacao ceremony, how to weigh all the ingredients, what to do. So yeah, take a look at the website. That's probably, did I tell you?
Yep.
www.inspiredhealing.co.uk. There's lots of resources on there. And if you need to, I'm always available for a half an hour chat. If you just want some, even if you never come to see me again, if I can inspire you in half an hour, I'd be willing to free chat. I'll be really happy to do that.
And I have all of that information to contact Helen in the show notes. We talked about a lot of different topics today: sexual abuse, childhood trauma, betrayal, addiction, resilience. So, if any of these topics resonate with you or someone else, please share the podcast with your people and help us grow our audience here. And until next time, before I sign off, remember that I hold a free live resilience training program once a month. The link is up here, and it'll also be in the show notes for you to click. Please join me. And until next time, be real, be resilient, reclaim your life. Ciao.